All right. Good morning, everyone. And thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning as we welcome back Karyn Harvey. She will be doing her training on trauma-informed behavior support plans. So we really look forward to having you here again with us. My name is Danielle Daly. I am the Professional Development Coordinator here with the Illinois Crisis Prevention Network. I'm just going to go over a very quick housekeeping items, and then I will pass on over to Karyn. Everyone is muted. Your cameras are disabled. Please use that chat box, which I see everyone is already doing this morning, to interact throughout the training, ask questions. You can also use that Q&A to ask questions as well, but please be sure to interact throughout the training today. We will run from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Please visit our website, ICPN.org. You can view our upcoming workshops or review past recorded ones. You can also sign up to receive our mailings to be the first person to know about those trainings to sign up for. Please also join us in, I think it's June 16th, Friday, June 16th, we'll have Karyn back with us for her trauma-informed leadership training. So be sure to sign up for that one as well. The last thing, continuing education certificates, they will come to the email address that you registered with. Please give me about 14 days to get those out to everyone. We have a lot of people on the webinar today, so it's going to take me a little bit of time to get those out to everyone. If you did not get them after that 14-day time period, please send me an email. My email is ddaly@hope.us. I will put that into the chat box as well. I think that's all I have. Karyn, you ready?
I was ready, but I was muted. Oh, well, what else is new? So thank you so much, Danielle, and thank you for bringing me in. I'm so honored to be a small part of your organization. I don't know if you see this sign. I'm trying to show this sign, Defend Human Dignity. There was a fellow with a disability made that and gave that to me and said, keep going. So I like to show that. I put that there. That happened last month. But welcome. I just want to say thank you. So many people here. I did not expect that, and that's so wonderful. Thank you for bringing me into this wonderful organization. You guys are great. It's exciting to work with you. And thank you all for all you have done during this pandemic. Oh my goodness. I have to always stop and say thank you to everybody because you know, the amazing feats, and I bet every single person here can think of somebody that they helped in some way, right? I bet every single person here can think of someone. Many of you had kids, maybe some of you had elderly parents to support, friends you were worried about, so many people, and so many things that you did that nobody knows about. There's a saying from Nichiren Daishonin, unseen virtue brings visible reward. So there's a visible reward waiting somewhere. But I know with this particular group that so many of you did so many things that nobody else knows about because you are in the human service field and most of you are in the field of intellectual disabilities. And you were helping people that were so isolated and marginalized and alone, and you know, you were there, you were making the difference. So I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, I have a heart here, got a lot of props. From the bottom of my heart, the heart has a hole in it, oh well. Thank you so much. Thank you. All the stories we could tell, we could just fill up our entire webinar with your stories of things you did for people, ways in which you help people, ways in which you reach out. Those of you who kept the system going, those of you who kept reaching out to people, those of you supporting the supporters, those of you doing the direct support. Thank you. And, you know, it will not be forgotten. This will be in the history books. And you'll be able to tell your grandchildren, right? But we'll all look back and say, wow, we did this at such a difficult time. We were there and we stood up for people. So first of all, I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart, because everywhere I go, and I met a bunch of people in Illinois, who are trainers and just wonderful people. And everywhere I go, I hear stories of how people just stretched and reached out and took risks and did everything they could to support people through the pandemic. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And, just take a minute and congratulate yourself, because you obviously didn't quit. Why would you be sitting through this, and why would you need the credits? And that's a wonderful thing, because, many people did, and I don't blame them. There are all kinds of reasons that people left our field, but we had a number of people leave the field. And it is so precious to me to be able to train and connect with and talk to those who hung in there and those who are so committed, like yourselves. So, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much. I always have to start with that, because I mean that from my heart. And I feel like in the human service field, we don't congratulate ourselves, right? We don't acknowledge ourselves. We don't stop and say, wow, look at what I did, right? We don't do that, because we're just doing the next thing and on to the next thing. So I hope that everybody can take a minute and just acknowledge yourself and acknowledge what you accomplished and the great work that you did. Thank you, because you kept going, right? That's what really counts in life, is to not give up. So thank you, thank you, thank you. You guys are great. Just because you're here. And because of all the things that no one knows that you did. Okay, now I feel better, because that is always so important to me to acknowledge, and so precious, like what people have done and gone through and given during this period. So thank you. Now let's talk about the behavior plans, right? So this is the training, and our hope is that we can be interactive, and we can, what I'll do is I'll go through it, and then we're going to have a good amount of time at the end to really have discussion and talk. And I'll have to tell you, I'm still learning, and I'm still finding things out. And I learned largely from my mistakes. I tell you, I learned from three things, right? I learned, number one, from my mistakes. Number two, I learned from the DSPs who get it. Those frontline staff who really get it are the ones who have taught me. And they are amazing. And I have realized that pretty much none of them ever followed my behavior plan. So I had to go and follow them and learn from them. I had to humble myself, right? Because they were the ones getting it right. So then I could write a different type of behavior plan and learn. And I will have some stories about that today. And then I also have learned so much from the folks that I support, who have taught me so much about, their lives and about courage, right? To keep going. Like, I think I would have been so discouraged and so defeated with half the situations that people have been through. So that's really great. So let's look at these plans. I know this is part of our field, right? That we have these plans in place. Let's start from square one. Who is the plan for? It's for the staff. And we shouldn't kid ourselves otherwise, right? So I remember I've always supervised the psych associates, after I got my PhD. At first, I didn't have a PhD, and I was getting so frustrated. So because I wanted to be the boss, because I'm kind of a bossy person. You're probably picking that up. Do this, don't do that, do this. It can be obnoxious, I'm going to be honest. But I am bossy. And so I had to go back to school to get a PhD. And then I could supervise the psych associates. And I had this one psych associate who would write a plan where every word had to have at least 5 syllables, right? I would be like, Mike, I don't think I understand what you're saying. And if I don't understand it, the staff are definitely not going to understand it. And Mike would be like, yes, but we have to use the correct terminology and we have to do this and we have to do that. And, the staff would kind of just laugh about it. The staff would say like, yeah, I don't know what the hell he's talking about. Sorry, I have verbally inappropriate behavior. But we want to use a simple, clear language, and I'll be saying this throughout, but the plan should be clear, should provide guidelines for the staff. And I know I'm not telling you anything that you don't know, but throughout the years, we've sometimes had plans presented as this is the way, this is the key to fixing. And it's actually the key to supporting staff. And that's what I found through the years. The plan should provide those simple, clear guidelines. And that's what it's for. It's written for the staff, and it's for guidelines for the staff. And what is the plan not for? The plan is not about fixing the person or fixing that person's behavior. Because the minute we get into that mode, like, I will fix you and I'm going to make you better and I'm going to make you change, we set up a power struggle. Because we are telling the staff, you're in charge of this person. And if they have this problem behavior, that's your fault. Right? Think about that. What does that do? That makes the staff anxious. That makes them want to control, want to be in charge, because you can't do this because this is a bad reflection on me if you're doing this. And it creates a power struggle. And no one ever wins a power struggle. And I think a lot of the difficulties we have come from power struggles, and we'll talk about that more. So the plan is not to fix the person. The plan is to help staff have the best possible strategy. And time again, I learned that I was the one who needed to change, and I needed to change my approach, and I needed to change my understanding. I had to sometimes regroup and say, okay, this plan isn't working. I'm getting it wrong. I'm not understanding this person. What can I do to understand this person? What can I do to provide the support that's needed? How can I regroup, right? Because the only person I can change is me. I found that out in 35 years of marriage. I've tried a lot to change my husband. But if I'm nicer, he's nicer. I learned that. It took a long time. I thought if I could just tell him everything wrong with him, that he would just appreciate it and just jump up and want to change. That didn't really work out. He had a list for me as well. So, yeah, right? So we can't change another person. We can't fix another person. We can change our approach. And I think that's the most important thing that we can teach the staff, right? You are your best instrument. You can regroup, you can pull back, you can try a different approach. And let's look at these approaches, right? And every single person is different. That's the other mistake I made. When I first started writing plans, I was hired before going back to school. I had my master's and I was a behavior specialist, and I would write plans that were, all about, fixing that behavior and changing that person. And I set the staff up, and they would get very frustrated because the plan didn't work. And sometimes when it worked, it would only work for a short time, and then the person would figure out a workaround, right? And I started to realize how important it is to look at really what I can do differently and how I can support the staff in supporting that person, rather than putting a formula on a person. And that was the big mistake that I made over and over again, was, okay, this behavior has this procedure, right? Okay, somebody who puts hole in the walls, we redirect them, and then we have a differential reinforcement of alternative behaviors, right? And someone who's attention seeking, we extinguish that, and we, try to withdraw attention and only give attention for positive behaviors and things like that often I missed what was really going on with the person and sometimes put that cookie cutter plan. That same guy that used 5 syllables sometimes had the wrong name in the plan. And I had to talk to him about that. Like, hey, wait a minute. Everybody is so different and you're cutting and pasting. And that cutting and pasting won't cut it. Because we got to figure out this person. Because everybody's different. Okay. So keys for successful trauma-informed plans. So you can tell this is a theme, right? That simplify. It should be so easily read. You know, cutting and pasting. Nancy says cutting and pasting makes me nuts. I love that. Thank you, Nancy. Me too. Like, and then sometimes they get the name wrong and you're like, Katya. And there's like, okay, this is self-injurious behaviors and this is what we do for self-injurious behaviors. No. In fact, there's research showing that self-injurious behaviors actually, there's Gomez and Ford did this really important piece of research where they showed that it's directly correlated to people's emotional pain when they start cutting themselves, right? This is an expression of pain. This isn't something that is a attention seeking or a bad behavior and we just redirect or give attention in another way. Like we have to go deeper. So yeah, we want to make we want to really incorporate those elements of trauma-informed support, meaning what is that person's pain? What have they been through? What are they bringing to the table that we don't even know? And that's our challenge, right? Because Bruce Perry says in our field, well, he doesn't say in our field, Bruce Perry says, you know, the most important question is not what's wrong with you, it's what happened to you, right? Not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you. And what happened to you is the question we have to ask. But our unique challenge in the world of intellectual disabilities is that people often cannot tell us. And often we will not know the definite, we won't know the connection. We won't know what really went on. And people will show us, but they can't necessarily tell us. So that's why it's that much more important to have elements of trauma-informed support in the behavior plan so that we can be on alert for those symptoms of trauma, right? Rather than misreading them as, okay, this person's being manipulative or they're trying to get something. So we really have to have that kind of those extra eyes open, right? To see that this person may not be able to tell us what trauma they've been through, but they've been through things. And in some ways they're showing us. And they're showing us their pain. So we have to have these elements of trauma-informed support because of their trauma, right? And trauma comes in all different degrees. We can have a big T trauma and we can have little t traumas, right? We can have the smaller traumas, but Francine Shapiro showed us through her research that the smaller traumas add up and can create post-traumatic stress disorder. They can be just as impactful, right? Being bullied, being excluded. This is very impactful, and yet it might not seem, you know, as significant. So we want to incorporate those elements of trauma-informed support, sorry. And then we want to outline positive strategies. You already know this. You know, we all know that we need positive strategies. I'm so happy that the folks, you know, promoting positive behavioral supports look at that setting environment. They look at the 3-tiered approach. They look at the fact that sometimes counseling is needed. You know, we want to have positive strategies, and they're so, so important. So we want to incorporate that. So, oops, sorry about that, guys. Trauma is the elephant in the room. So those of you, I had asked Danielle, how many people already heard my trauma training? So some, you know, right? But I think we can't talk enough about trauma. We just went through a giant trauma, right? We just went through COVID, and already folks had a lot of trauma. There are, how many of you, I'm sure many of you, let me put it this way, but how many of you work with folks who were in the institution? A lot of trauma in the institution back in the day, right? If you've seen Geraldo Rivero's Willowbrook, I'm going to be nice and not show it to you. You never know. Sometimes when I show videos, things go wrong. So I'm just going to say, we've seen it, right? We've seen it. We've seen the trauma of institutionalization. And back in the day, things were so horrible. So I'll tell you my experience. I had a job in my early years. I had many jobs, and I've told these stories, right? I was the behavior specialist, but I was also the janitorial instructor, and who knew? They didn't tell me that part when they hired me, but that was great because I got to work with people and get close to them, and I got to see their struggle, because they would try to talk to people. They would try to talk to some of the parishioners in the churches we clean. They would try to talk to the priest, and people would ignore them, or people would complain. And I just saw that the day-to-day dismissal and marginalization. And that was important for me to see, because that's its own kind of trauma. And then there's my cat, Jojo. Of course, he has to make an appearance. And then I had another assignment to go to Rosewood, and that was the institution in Maryland, right? And to take people out. And this was years ago. And my job was to go there to review records and meet people, and then decide who could come to our agency. And that was so hard because I had to leave people. And I'll tell you what it was like. I'll never forget it for my whole life. Went into this, there were just giant rooms with concrete walls where people were sitting in their own excrement, where people were screaming, where people were rocking, not talking to each other, some sucking their thumbs and rocking, adults. There were a number of adults, and this broke my heart. There were a number of adults in cribs because no one had worked with them on mobility, and they had mobility difficulties, and they just left them their entire childhood. And now they were adults, left them in cribs. There was a giant room, a giant gymnasium with a drain in the middle of it. And I didn't understand what that was. And so one guy that I work with, his name was James. I told James's story before, so I'm not going to repeat the story because that's the sign of a very old person. I'm trying not to get that old, who repeats stories over and over again and says, I never told you this, but so I'm trying to not repeat my stories. But James told me in that gym every single night, they were all lined up and stripped naked and hosed down. And that's why there was a drain in the middle of the gym. And he never wanted to take showers. And we wrote behavior plans and tried to fix him and say, you got to take showers, you got to be clean, you got to wear clean clothes, you got to do this, you got to do that. And he finally opened up. Years later, he didn't say anything about it for a long time, but how upsetting it was to have water sprayed on him because it reminded him of every night being so humiliated and hosed down. It's people with dignity. And the way that people were fed was that they put the food out in the middle of a room every meal, like a trowel, like, they were pigs. And people had to just grab their food and fight for their food. And often their food got stolen. There were no place settings. Can you imagine eating every meal like that? And I have known, I'm sorry to say, 5 different people who died because they stuffed food so desperately when they were eating, because they were in the institution for so many years and never felt safe, never felt that they would have enough food. And that was, and Lori says you have a lot of people eating fast. And that's what I wonder. I've seen several things, Lori, thank you for sharing that. I've seen several situations. I've seen people who were in foster care placements who didn't get enough food, who weren't given enough food. I'm actually working with somebody where that's her situation right now, where that was her situation. And she is now over 200 pounds overweight. because she always has that feeling like she won't get enough. And then I've seen people from the institution who, and some who passed away. And folks, oh, thank you, Julie, and folks who go through the trash to look for food. Exactly. Because probably they were able to do that, right? That's one way you could get more food, because people stole your food and you couldn't get enough. And so many things that I can't even imagine living through. And so many people, I'm sure some of you know people who were put there as children, hiding food in their rooms. So much of that. Thank you, Jennifer. We see so much of that. Thank you for sharing that. I've seen so much people hiding their food, and I don't blame them. I would hide my food. And people who swallow it whole because they can't take the time to chew it, right? Because they're desperate. A number of people who didn't have teeth, and sometimes they removed people's teeth. And Michael saw that as well. Thank you. Sometimes they removed people's teeth. We had people we work with who had, maybe they were feeling very desperate and very traumatized and scared. And so they were biting people. And a very common procedure was to remove the teeth of people who were biting. So but you didn't get a different diet. Oh gosh, so many great chats. So Amy says we have someone who digs through the garbage, and if you try to stop him, he has a behavior because he's feeling desperate, right? Like that was the one thing that kept him safe, was if I didn't get enough to eat, I could still get it from the garbage. And Rebecca says she worked with a gentleman that was that way with showering, and oh my gosh, he still struggles. He showered with cold water to help. Oh my God. He was showered with cold water to make him straighten out, huh? Isn't that terrible? And then of course he doesn't want to take showers. And I know people who have really been so traumatized by being abused in showers, right? And they don't want to take a shower. Cindy says hoarding food in the room is big with one of your people. And I'm sure that they feel like, they're not going to get enough food. I'm sure there was a time in their life when they didn't. And bye, Antonio. See you soon. Thank you. I'm so grateful for you all sharing these things. It's really just so heartbreaking. And if you imagine yourself in that situation, how could you ever feel safe, right? How could you ever feel like you're going to get enough to eat or you're going to be okay? And I think that's what, I know I work with a couple of people who were hoarding, and we just tried to set up something. We put a refrigerator in their room because this food would rot and bugs would come. So we put a refrigerator in their room and said, you can have your special snacks, and had healthy snacks there. But that sense of ownership of food just really calmed them down, to that creative problem solving is so important. But so there I was, and just horrified. And then I could only take 15 people. There were hundreds and hundreds. And, we're like, okay, well, who do you pick? Who do you pick? It was so hard because you just saw this trauma, and everybody came out with such issues. And I got it wrong. I was like, oh yeah, this is a behavior we have to fix. Not remembering what I just saw sometimes. It took me a while, and it took the people who could really advocate and explain what they went through, teaching me how it was for them and their experience, because I naively thought, well, now you're safe and now you're in a good situation, so you should be okay now. And then I started to study trauma. And the reason I studied the trauma is I went back to school. I got my, Ph.D. and you would think I would learn it there, but back in the day, that was 100 years ago. Back in the day, they didn't teach trauma. They only said, Rose, so you know how it is when you had to eat small portions. You never forget that. You never get over that. Oh, I'm so sorry, but yeah, it stays with you. And then Christina says it's really empowering that you're safe to acknowledge when you got. Oh, thank you so much. I have to do that because I don't want to lie. But so I really did misunderstand until, finally we started when I went back to school, and then I left, and then we started doing therapy with people, which was a large reason of why I went back, because I felt the supervising psychologist kept saying to me, my supervisor said, you can't do therapy with people with disabilities. You can't do therapy with people with MR. You can only modify their behavior. Oh, sorry, Rose. But you can only modify their behavior, is what they were telling me. And I knew it was wrong. I knew that these people needed to talk, because people would always try to talk, right? And half the people who were trying to connect and trying to talk got labeled as having attention-seeking behaviors when they were lonely and traumatized and feeling like they needed to tell someone their story to be empowered or to be validated. Really, it was about validation. Oh, and thank you, Angela. It is so extraordinary, isn't it? We forget that the trauma that some of our individuals have gone through is what makes them so extraordinary today. It's really true. Like heroes, like survivors, right? It's really amazing what people have been through and how they endured. So I really appreciate your saying that. Yeah, it's unbelievable. I don't know that I would have endured it, right? And so I went back to school, and yes, they are formidable and they're admirable. Yes, thank you. I went back to school, and I got my, got out, got my license, blah, blah, blah. We started doing therapy, and we heard one trauma story after another. So many stories of sexual abuse, right? And now we know. And good point, Cindy. Everybody's so different, and we don't know what they went through. We don't know what works for them. And so I started doing the therapy, and I started supervising people doing therapy, and we heard horrific stories of sexual abuse. And I'm going to ask you, how many of you know somebody with an intellectual disability who's been sexually abused? And I'm assuming it's almost everybody, right? Because people, thank you, Tanya, people have been through so much. And the abuse that went on in the institution, was unbelievable. But also abuse in foster care. I've worked with families where they just were vigilant and protecting their child, and they still got abused, right? Thank you all for sharing. Yes, it's just unbelievable. The abuse, and thank you for sharing. And we know the impact, right? The impact of one night of a sexual assault, how it can ruin someone's life. We see that. We see many cases in the news. We see all kinds of situations. We know this. Now imagine that you have no power. You have no one to tell. You have no support and nowhere to turn. So when we were doing this therapy, we were horrified. I remember this one young woman, I worked with her for a year doing therapy. We had a behavior plan for her. She was diagnosed with a borderline personality disorder. And everyone said she was so attention seeking. After a year of therapy, she finally opened up and said, my father sexually abused me for all these years, and I'm going to be in big trouble if he finds out that I told. And she was terrified. But this was her life. And I've got to tell you, just about everybody I've worked with, and I've worked with many, many people with the diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, just about everybody has a history of being sexually abused. And that's a reality. There were only 2 people that I knew that exactly, thank you, Reggie, people are so often threatened to be hurt if they tell, and feel like no one will believe them, and also feel terrified, right? So there are only 2 people I work with that had a borderline personality disorder who didn't have sexual abuse, and I've worked with over 50. And those 2 people had invasive medical procedures at very young ages over and over again. So your boundaries are violated. When you're sexually abused, your boundaries are violated. The intense attention you get is for your sexuality. And you get an inappropriate level of intimacy and attention. And then oftentimes people weren't giving you attention before that, right? So I'm going to stop and read some of these chats. They're so important. Thank you. Deanna says, oh, I just lost it. Oh, there's so many. Sorry. She was a foster parent. Deanna says she was a foster parent for years, and some of those children had experienced so much trauma, they didn't know how to verbalize it. Exactly. It's another part of your brain, right? And then people confuses them, and they want, like, right. So like Julie says, you have residents that are unable to recognize that the abuse was wrong. So many people felt like that was all I could get, the only attention I could get, the only love I could get, right? And attention is actually, Reggie, attention confuses love, and it is a behavior to keep you safe because you keep that person satisfied and they're not going to hurt you. A 6-year-old in your special ed class, you needed to get counseling for them, but oh my God, thank you, Erin, saying that the therapist said that, you know, autistic kids can't do play therapy because they don't have imagination. This is so wrong. Everybody needs therapy, and we therapists can adjust. We can figure it out. I have 100 different materials and resources. I just published a book for therapists to do therapy. We can do it, and we can do it for all age levels. And, you know, Angela is saying something very important. She's saying she has an individual who always apologizes. Shame is often the core of trauma. And you wonder what happened to him. He had some trauma. Judith Herman says, oftentimes people who have had trauma think bad things happen to me because I'm a bad person. And that becomes a very deep belief in their life, right? That I deserve this. And I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And I'm sorry is I'm acknowledging I'm a bad person. It's also placating an abuser. I'm sorry can be the one thing that worked. Also, I'm expressing that I believe I'm a bad person and I'm wrong, right? And it's so true. And sometimes it's the people behind closed doors, Bethany, right, that are doing the abuse. And Kate says she has a lot of people who are constantly apologizing, and Jennifer who feel unworthy. Thank you so much for sharing all this. So you all know that just about everybody we work with has had some level of trauma because they've also been abused. I mean, they've been bullied, you know, even if they haven't been blatantly abused, you know. Exactly, they're trying to get some control over their life. Very good point. Gabor Mate says, trauma is not what happened to you, it's how what happened to you made you feel, right? And that's so important. That's so important because that's right, the years of abuse they see as normal and they feel bad about themselves. It's so interesting that you say that and that guilt, and I'm glad you brought that up. So at that same conference where I got that beautiful sign about defend human dignity, which we're all doing, right? There was, I did the all-day training in trauma, which you guys heard most of it. If not, there's recordings. So I'm gonna answer Courtney's question in 1 minute. That's a very important question, Courtney. So this one fellow, I just want to tell you about this one guy, because this one guy had been in the institution in Canada. So this was in Alberta, Canada. And I was like, wow, I thought you Canadians were so nice, but they are, but there were still institutions everywhere, right? And with very bad conditions. And he every time I stopped for questions, he would raise his hand, he'd just raise his hand, and he would tell some other horrific thing that happened to him in the institution. But the thing that broke my heart the most was he said, my parents dropped me off when I was a kid. And this happened to so many people, right? Because that's what the doctors told them to do. That's the best thing you can do when people believe them. My parents dropped me off as a kid. And I was sure for my whole life, up until recently, when someone finally explained to me that that's what the doctors told my parents, that it was because I was a bad person. And he carried that guilt and that shame, like I had to be in this horrible situation and with all this abuse and with not enough food, all these things, like all these circumstances, because I was bad. He said only recently it's only just a little while ago, he said, that I got to see that it wasn't because I was bad. Whew. So I want to go to these questions. They're so wonderful. How can we help support these clients who over apologize? I have a client who will get so flustered and they will yell, "I'm sorry," right? And without hearing that you're saying you're okay, right? It's so hard to get people to feel. So I think there's several solutions, Courtney. I'm a big proponent of therapy for people. I think that they need a constant reassurance. They need the trauma work. I do EMDR with folks. I'm in desensitization reprocessing. I've done it for 20 years with folks with IDD. And we've got to get them exactly like Nancy's saying, we've got to get the mental health people engaged with us so that they can work with us. They cannot say that they're not trained, because I always say to people, are you trained in working with human beings? So we need to get folks treatment. It's really important. I also think that we should work differently with people rather than having behavior plans focus on what's wrong with the person. I think we should focus on building a positive sense of self. I have an approach called positive identity development, where so much of the identity of people is I'm a bad person, I have bad behavior, and I'm, I deserve bad things. And sometimes you see people sabotage themselves right when they're about to earn a reward. They'll sabotage it because, look, I'm a bad person and I don't deserve this. And I love that Kate says you can joke with people and make silly noises and make them smile. Yes, let's have some joy. Let's have some lightheartedness. But it's so true that, and the EMDR has worked amazingly with folks that I work with. And it's wonderful because it's not really dependent on people's ability to verbalize what happened to them, right? And it's not dependent on, them being able to set cognitive behavioral goals or to do reframing. It works on a whole nother level. So I really support that. And then I believe I have a number of workbooks on my website that people can use and just to build up a positive sense of self. My book, To Celebrate Me, which just celebrates the person. You can write the book with them and decorate it and they can show it to everybody. So I have a number of little workbooks on developing a positive sense of self. And my book about my recovery is a book where people can really help to heal and talk about, what they went through and celebrate that they got through it, rather than look at what's wrong with them, right? So many abilities. Thank you, Jennifer. Exactly. And she's always saying, I have a disability. And you're saying, no, so many amazing abilities. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. So this is so important. And thank you for sharing this. We've got to understand that trauma really, truly is the elephant in the room. And really, we have to support people. People have a right to have therapy. And we have to have a positive approach in our plans that give them that kindness and that support that they really need. So, sources of trauma, we already talked about sexual abuse. Joe Shapiro did a wonderful piece on NPR about the sexual abuse. I was able to meet him. He's amazing. Sexual abuse of people with intellectual disabilities. And he went to the Bureau of Statistics and he said, how many people with intellectual disabilities are have been sexually assaulted as opposed to people without? So there's a lot of statistics about disabilities in general, but he was able to get those statistics teased out for people with intellectual disabilities. And they said people with intellectual disabilities are 7 times more likely to be sexually abused than people without. And that's a very low number, right? You guys know, it's a low number because it doesn't include all the people that don't report. It doesn't include so much, right? How about how many of you have been in situations where the police say, well, they can't talk, so we can't do anything. They can't tell us. I've been in a bunch of situations like that. And you're like, no, we know it happened. Well, do you have the physical evidence? We didn't get it in time, and they're not speaking. So physical abuse, bullying, we know that's a reality, right? Exclusion, institutionalization, like we're talking about, very impactful. And not only is institutionalization impactful for the older folks that we work with who have been institutionalized, and had that history, and many from childhood, which just, I can't even imagine being abandoned by your family, right? How devastating is that? That is a giant trauma. But then recently, I've been working with a number of people who were transitioning youth who came from residential facilities where they were restrained a lot. And they were, really just treated horribly. Recently, I was asked to consult with an agency in right outside of Washington, D.C., where they were serving a young woman who was at the Judge Rottenberg Center who had been receiving shocks. This is still going on. And I've actually consulted with several cases like this. And these people are terrified, of course. And when you've had that experience, any transition is terrifying. So here's what happened. This woman came to them and she was very traumatized, and she came as a teenager and she'd been shocked at that center. And so it took several years to get her to stop attacking people because she thought they were going to hurt her. So she would attack them and she would hide. She did so many things. Oh, yes. Thank you. Thank you, Maria, for sharing that. And thank goodness that you are a mom and also a professional, because I'm so appreciative when I have family members here, because you have that really unique and very important perspective that we all need to learn from. And thank you. So this girl had been shocked, and actually, Maria, they were sued, and they tried to shut them down or get them at least to stop using shocks. And it was the parents who spoke up and said, keep doing it, because those parents felt so out of control and said, this is working, just do it. So thank you for being the parent that you are. And I understand parents have trauma, the families have trauma. So this young woman finally settled. It took 2 years, and finally she got used to her staff. She was okay. She wasn't doing a lot, but she didn't want to go to school. But they were doing some homeschooling and they were supporting her. And thank you for sharing this. And Nancy, you're a mom too. Thank you so much. And I see, Maria, you're so right. And people can testify. People have all kinds of ways of telling us things. And this young woman finally got calm. And guess what? She turned 21 and they put her in their adult program with all new staff. And they couldn't understand why she started running away all the time. And she would be running into traffic. I mean, running and eloping, we use the term back then, but just putting herself in harm's way. Well, often people with trauma will put themselves in harm's way because they think they have to do that to get safe. And she was terrified of new staff because she didn't know what people would do to her because of what people had done to her at that center. So I didn't have to charge them any money. I just said, well, do you have some staff from the youth program that could come work with her? Can we switch some people around? And that worked wonders. Just brought 2 staff in and she felt safe again. So transitions can be very hard for people who have had trauma. And I've been seeing that more and more. So we have to be so careful to do our transitions gently and slowly and gradually. I know when we transition people out of institutions, it's so important to be very gentle. Yes, we want them out of those institutions, but we want them to feel safe with who they're coming to. We want them to know the staff. So take that time to get to know them, have visits, get support, if possible, even therapy. And I know that's hard. And we can assume trauma, right? We can really assume it. Let's look at our comments. Yeah, let's see. Yeah, and Down syndrome, by the way, recently it's come out how frequent Down syndrome and autism are together. So we've started to realize that it's actually very common to see that. And autism has its own type of trauma. Nancy knows, right? It's very hard to be in a world where you're not quite sure what people are saying, where you're being overly stimulated, where sounds are screaming, and it's so hard. And thank you, Rose. Yes, you know, these people have wonderful hearts and they're fantastic people. Thank you for the work that you've done. Thank you for all of you for this important work, because this is what people need to heal. They need to feel that they're cared about, not as much corrected as cared about. And then we can correct ourselves and figure a new workaround, right? We can change ourselves and our approach. Thank you. Let's look at the betrayal. So there's so much betrayal, right? So much. I often get called in to do the crisis counseling after sexual abuse cases. And so many people have had an experience of the devastation when they come to me. Let's put it this way. The devastation is that they were told that this person who abused them said, "I'm going to marry you," or "I'm your boyfriend." And when they found out that they were betrayed, that it's called a rape and that there is no marriage, it's devastating. I mean, being raped is devastating, but when people find that out, it destroys them. So Julie says, we had a 40-year-old woman who opened up to us about sexual abuse by her father. We called the police so she could make a report. And that is so beautiful. Thank you for doing that, even though he passed away, and got in touch with local survivors of sexual abuse. That was the best possible thing to do. And what a way to empower her. Very empowering. Yes. Thank you so much, Julie, for sharing that. And it's so important that we validate people, because that's a source of trauma. When you feel like you've been lied to, you've been betrayed, and no one knows what you went through, right? So that validation is really key. And that's something we can even put in plans, like make sure you tell this person that they've been through a lot and they're wonderful, they're strong, they're a survivor, and wow, bad things happened to you that you didn't deserve. You can even put statements in the plan to that order. Like, yes, let's acknowledge what you've been through. Let's acknowledge it's amazing how far you've come and how hard it was, and that I admire you. This is very healing for people. This is very healing, as well as getting them connected to other survivors in so many of these organizations that are there now for victims of abuse and survivors of abuse that are very helpful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And people can have all different degrees of trauma, right? We know this. We know this. So let's look at the fact that I have to apologize. I talk a lot about the brain. For those of you who have been through my other trainings, right? The brain, the brain, the brain. But it's important to just look at this piece, which is the fact that our brain is wired up for survival. And that means, from the days when we were in cavemen, we had to survive. So we have our brain stem, the part of the brain that just, breathes and gets the heart pumping and just tells the whole system to keep going, keep going, keep going. Then we have our limbic system, and that's where our fight, flight, or freeze is. But there's two parts to the limbic system. There's that sympathetic nervous system, which is the one that has the amygdala, which sends out danger signals when there's something dangerous and will trigger that fight, flight, or freeze response, right? We know about that. And then we have the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the only part of the brain that can calm down the amygdala when it's emitting danger signals. And then we have our smart part of the brain, the neocortex, which plans and thinks things out and just, gets it all organized and anticipates things and makes your lists, right? So here's how it works. And this is, to me, a very important piece for understanding what the folks that we work with and support are going through, often on a day-to-day basis, right? So when we were cavemen, right, this worked great. we were out in the field. Let's say we caught an antelope and we learned how to make fire and we're having an antelope roast. Woohoo. Kids are running around. Everybody's having a good time. And all of a sudden we see a furry thing. We're like, oh, what's that furry thing? Because we've never seen it before. And it runs up and it eats Linda, little Linda. No! There goes Linda. And the rest of us try to fight. Some of us try to fight it. Others run, right? We have that response because that in that yellow part of our brain, there's the amygdala, and the amygdala starts emitting the danger signals and fills the brain up with chemicals, cortisol and adrenaline. So it then rushes to the whole body, right? The whole body then is on high alert and is strengthened with these chemicals and can fight or run or respond in a much clearer, better way and more effectively to get away from the danger. And the smart brain doesn't operate. The smart brain goes offline, isn't sitting around analyzing who should I save first, just responds like, get the kids, let's do this. Somebody get the antelope so we can keep eating it. And we respond in a way that saves us, right? And the only part of us that can calm ourselves down is in that yellow part of the brain, is in that limbic system. And that's that parasympathetic nervous system that will tell you when you're okay. It only activates and calms down the amygdala and all those danger signals stop flashing if it sees itself as safe. Doesn't matter if your smart brain is analyzing and saying, well, you should be safe now. No, I don't feel safe, right? So, we know that. How many times have you heard a bump in the middle of the night? And unless you see that you're okay, or the dog's barking and you don't know why, unless you really see it and feel it, you're not going to be able to just lie in bed and tell yourself it's nothing, right? Some of us make our husbands get up. I don't have a dog. My cat is no help at all. But I do have a husband and I'm grateful. But whatever it is, we can't be reassured until we really know we're safe. So a couple weeks later, let's say we're back out there and now we caught a boar, and that's great. We're having a boar roast. Kids are running around. Everyone's happy except we miss little Linda. She was so adorable. And then we see another furry thing. This time we have a name for it. Our amygdala has identified it and starts flashing danger signals. It's a lion. It's a lion. Red alert. Red alert. And it fills our brains up with adrenaline and cortisol, and we're ready to fight and ready to freeze. Our smart brain is not sitting around going, is that the same one? Does it have the same stripes? Or maybe it's a relative. I think it didn't have. No, because everyone would get eaten if we did that. We have to just respond. So our smart brain goes offline. We're not analyzing. We're not thinking. We're just responding, right? And those of us that can grab some stones and sticks are going to try and kill it. Others are going to run. Little tiny cavemen are going to freeze. Some might fawn. Here's a piece of meat, little lion. No, I don't know. But the reality is that that's how we're wired, because that's how we survived. But now we sometimes still see lions, right? And many of the people that we work with intellectual disabilities are seeing a lion. And we don't know what those lions are, right? But that lion is a trigger. So I've told this story before. Actually, I'll tell a different version because so many examples of this kind of thing. Oh my God. So one time I used to be in a setting in this agency. We had a clinic and the psychiatrist was in one end and I was in the other, and we had people in the waiting room, right? And this one guy, William, who recently passed away, wonderful fellow, had been in years in a psychiatric institution and had been very abused by other patients there. And everyone said, oh, it was so horrible that he wasn't put in Rosewood instead of the psychiatric. Neither one was good, right? But he'd had a lot of trauma. And he was coming to see both of us, and he was waiting. And he was just sitting, and all of a sudden we heard screaming like a hyena, like, ah! high-pitched screaming. And he ran and he hid behind a chair and he was shaking and hiding. This new staff had walked in, someone who had just been hired, and he was sure that that person was going to attack him, that it was the same person who had abused him in the institution. And he could not calm down. It took at least a half an hour before he would even get out from behind that chair. We got that staff out of there right away because he was pointing at him and screaming, "Don't hurt me, don't hurt me, don't hurt me." That was the lion, right? I bet some of you have seen people who've been triggered and it's very irrational. And all of a sudden, oops, I'm sorry. All of a sudden they're screaming or they're running, and you don't know what the trigger is, but after a while, you can start to figure out what the lion was. Sometimes it's very irrational. Sometimes it's someone that they, don't even have a relationship with, but they look like someone who hurt them. They look like somebody. And that can be very triggering. And that is, right? So that amygdala is flashing, saying you're in danger. Weird. Sometimes they're very weird. I remember this one fellow, he used to, a couple of times a month, he would flip tables, throw chairs, just start screaming, and we never knew why. And you have to do CSI, right? You have to just investigate. So we were like, okay, what is it? And his staff's name was Shonda. And it was like, okay, it's when Shonda goes to lunch, because we had this rotation where you could go out to lunch, take a long lunch break once a week, everybody covered for everybody else, so that people can have long lunches once a week. It's her once a week lunch, but it wasn't every lunch. And finally she said, you know what the weirdest thing is? It's when I bring in a big fountain soda. And when I have a fountain soda with me, he starts screaming and flipping things. So we won't know, like I said earlier, we won't know what people have gone through in many cases. But what we can know is what's triggering them, what makes them feel unsafe, and what safety means to them and what they need to feel safe, right? So we had to have a no fountain soda zone where no one could bring a fountain soda anywhere around Bob. I bet some of you have seen things like this. So Ashley says she had a gentleman who had been in a rehab, lived at home, and when he came to us, the staff that were employed, he would yell and hit staff because they reminded him of the caretaker in the rehab. Exactly. And, it takes time. You have to talk to the person about their trauma and explain it to them. I think you'd be surprised how much people can understand. But oftentimes we're looking at a trauma response where they're triggered and they're fighting, they're freezing. They may have an irrational response of, I'm sorry. So many people I see go to shame, right? I'm a bad person. I'm sorry. Or neediness or fawning. And you see that with this person. So we want to make sure in the behavior plan that we're so clear of really investigating, interviewing staff, interviewing the person, finding out from family, what are the triggers? Yes, it's that past experience that made them feel that way. Yes, exactly, Rose. And then their amygdala, so it's not rational. That's what we need to understand. I'm telling you, I wrote some really bad plans because I had another fellow, every time he saw the program manager, he would start screaming and throwing things. And we had no idea why until we finally figured it out, that it was just that she looked like somebody. And I had a behavior plan that said every time he threw the chair, tell him, don't throw that chair, you'll lose your soda. Because he got a soda every day for having a good day. That was the worst possible plan because I was trying to appeal to his smart brain, that neocortex. The smart brain goes offline. When you're triggered, when you're thinking you're in danger, the only thing that can calm you down is really seeing and feeling on a sensory level that you're safe. So that reassurance, I always say to people, walk with me, talk with me, get them away from the trigger because they've been triggered and they're not feeling safe. And you can't just tell them, oh no, that's just Donna. She never did anything to you, because he wouldn't listen to that. And the minute we said, don't do that, you're going to lose your soda, he'd get even more upset. David Petoniak says, on a bad day, you really need a soda, right? And it was so much deeper. He was seeing a lion. People see lions all the time, and they have trauma responses, right? Because they're seeing lions. And those trauma responses, they act in an irrational manner. It doesn't get them what they want. You know, when we do the functional assessment, often you come up empty-handed, like, they're not doing it for this, this, or this. What's really going on? And it's very different than a behavioral response, where we assume, as we assume with the functional assessment, that people are doing something very calculating with an intent, trying to manipulate their environment to get something that they need. And Janelle says many times people or staff can cause the behaviors due to taking things away. Oh my gosh, thank you so much for saying that. Thank you. Janelle, response cost is sometimes inadvertently practiced, and it can really hurt people, right? Losing the reward. And sometimes even in the most positive of plans, people are told, because it translates down into either you're going to earn that reward or not, and they're told they didn't earn it, and that can be very hard. Also losing things, so many things that can trigger people. And we talked about people who were starved, and then you're going to tell them they're eating too much and restrict them, and that could cause panic on a very deep trauma-based level. Oh my God, you're going to starve me again. You're not letting me eat. You're putting me on a 1,200 calorie diet. And that's Angela. You know, you guys are someone's going to think that I'm paying you to say these things, put these things in the chat. Because yes, this is the power struggle that causes the behavior to get worse. So, and oftentimes, Rebecca, thank you for saying this. Oftentimes behaviors are the only thing people have to be able to advocate for themselves. They have no other power, right? So thank you, Lori. Thank you. Yes, you have to tell people, stop taking things away, stop punishing, stop removing, because that puts people in panic mode. And then that person who's taking away is no longer safe. I can't trust you. You're trying to punish me like all those people that punished me and then abused me. And we have to set things up so that the staff are safe. And then the person can calm down, because then that amygdala will stop flashing. And then their smart brain can come back online and they can be okay. So some of you may have heard this story before that I tell, but to me, it's so important because it illustrates the difference between a trauma response and that deliberate, intentional behavioral response. So Judy is someone I worked with years ago, and Judy she had so much trauma because she grew up in a rural area and was fairly neglected. And when she became a certain age, sorry to say this is a little tough story, and I apologize. Take care of yourselves if it's triggering. I'm so sorry. But at a certain age, her brother started sexually abusing her, right? And that was tough. But then as she got older, he did something really bad. He started bringing his friends, and they abused her in the barn. And she did something that I thought was really smart. She burned the barn down. But guess what? Of course, she got labeled a fire setter. She got put in the forensic institution where people who have charges, right? And the family disowned her, said, you said lies about your brother. She wasn't validated. She wasn't heard. She tried to protect herself, and she was labeled a fire setter. Then in the agency I worked in, we went and got her out of that institution, and we started serving her, and we had her in a house, and she had a pretty restrictive behavior plan because we were told, you know, she's a fire setter. You got to check her for hiding matches, which we had to check her purse and do, you know, check her stuff to make sure. And I got her, so I was the supervising psychologist, got someone to do counseling with her. Dawn, who is a wonderful counselor. Dawn was doing counseling with her. And Judy was telling her that she didn't like the house she was in because the staff would make fun of her when they had to check her for matches and check her purse and check her bag. They had to check her pockets. It was pretty invasive. And they would say, oh, let's see what the fire setter's doing. Oh, you're not going to set any fires, are you? And they'd laugh. And the other two people in the house getting services would also laugh. And Judy hated that house and said, my brother would always tease me. And then he abused me. So that teasing was such a trigger. And she wanted to move away from them. So I went to the boss and said, Judy really wants to move. And the boss said, well, if I moved everybody who wanted to move, that's all I'd be doing. And it costs money and blah, blah, blah. We can't just move everybody. It's your behavior plan. Your behavior plan is not good enough. So I was like, well, you're probably right about that because it's not working, and it's, involving this pat down and, all that is really making it worse for her. So I, redid the plan and tried to make it much more nurturing and supportive and talked about her trauma, but it didn't change anything. And Judy kept getting teased and all the other folks, the staff needed the plan, right? I know, the poor girl. The staff needed, well, that's who the plans are for. If we think we're fixing people with our plans, we're going to only miss the boat and sometimes make it worse. We're guiding the staff. And then that person can feel safe, can feel cared about, can feel supported, and can have a better day. And we can support their happiness. And happy people aren't setting fires or putting holes in the wall. So in any case, right? So Judy got triggered one too many times and flipped out. She just, Picola, that's the staff's name, had made fun of her one too many times. And Judy flipped out. She started flipping tables. She broke a lamp. And then she broke the flat screen TV, which we had just gotten flat screen TVs. And that was terrible. And guess what the boss did? He moved her. So Judy was a very compassionate person. And she went to the day program. And I actually saw her do this. She would gather little groups around and she gave workshops. And she said to them, do you want to move? And everybody wanted to move, right? Everybody always wanted to move. Everyone was always asking to move. No one got moved. Do you want to move? Break your TV. And at least 3 TVs got broken in the next 6 months and everyone got moved. Now, Judy's behavioral issue was total trauma response. That amygdala was firing, that teasing was such a trigger, and she saw red and she just flipped out, right? And that was a fight response. But all those other guys, the other 3, they were like, I want to move. Bam, bam, bam. I broke my TV. I want to move. See, I want to move. Because exactly what someone said earlier, it was Janelle, they had no power. So they had to use their behavior for power because we weren't listening to them. They had no input into their life. Our person-centered plan was not person-centered. There was no validating, there was no hearing. And so they had to resort to using their behavior, as several of you pointed out, right? So yeah, let's listen to people so they don't have to use their behavior. And it doesn't mean that everybody gets everything. What's most important is that people feel heard and people feel validated. In my behavior plans, I started realizing that, and this was years ago when I had written some really bad plans where we were ignoring people who were having attention-seeking behaviors. They just got desperate. They got worse and worse and worse, right? We had this one young woman who would call 911, say, I want to kill myself. And then she'd get to go get a nice meal, see the nurses, have a good time at the hospital. And I finally realized, well, what are we not doing that the hospital's doing? We're not paying enough attention to her. We're not making her feel secure. We're not making her feel cared about. And we changed the plan so that we flooded her with attention. And we started, I counseled her, I talked to her, and then I told her she could have a phone call with me, 4 times a week on the day she didn't see me. Her staff, we wrote into the behavior plan talk time where staff would just have to sit down and listen to her. Yeah, you flood people with attention, flood them with attention. And because they're lonely, they're disconnected, it's connection seeking, right? Yeah. So what can we do that the hospital does, and how can we do it better, right? So they don't have to call 911. And it really worked. Like we just flood to the point where we got on her nerves. Like she kept, one day she didn't call me. It would be a 4 o'clock phone call. And I said, what happened to you? You didn't call. She's like, yeah, I know. I'm getting tired of calling you. Because she knew I would be there. And she knew the staff would we had that talk time twice a day. And it was in the behavior plan, sit down and listen. And we trained all the staff in active listening skills. We often don't train the staff in the soft skills that they really need. Yeah. So exactly, it's unrealistic for someone to go a whole month. And you know what, Becky, I will take on that person who told you that you were spoiling them. Tell them to talk to me. People need to be spoiled. They need to feel nurtured and cared about and loved. Yes. Send them to me, Carrie. I want to talk to these people because you are not spoiling anyone. They're not spoiled. They've had really hard lives. You're trying to help them heal. Thank you. Thank you for being there. And I believe very strongly in non-contingent reinforcement. In fact, I heard a very respected behaviorist present on non-contingent reinforcement 2 weeks ago. And they knew exactly, Becky, they knew they could count on you. And that's what people need. You're the safe person that makes that yellow part of the brain, the parasympathetic nervous system, say, I'm going to be okay. And you're spreading it. That's the best thing we can do. And we don't teach the staff the soft skills of helping people to feel safe. But that's the most important thing that they can do. And if you think about it, I bet everybody knows someone who is like magic staff who you can give anybody to and they calm down, right? Think about that person. What do? They communicate caring. They listen. They're like Becky. Becky, thank you. They support. And, thank you. Christine said this is a source of exactly, it's frustrating trying to communicate to staff how important this is. I feel that's why I'm trying to do as much trauma-informed care training, because it's very simple to understand trauma and people have their own trauma. And once we can get staff to understand that they're working with traumatized folks and they have that level of empathy, they can be a lot nicer. And it really changes the culture when you can have regular trauma-informed support training going on. That's why I was doing the train the trainers. Thank you so much. But that's really important in terms of a culture change, to get the DSP to realize that people need support. And we're asking them, we're asking so much of them. And the staff need trauma-informed leadership. Yeah, because it's hard for them too. Thank you. They don't, folks it's like they're Holocaust survivors in many cases. And how are they going to feel safe unless we really actively communicate safety, right? And it's not the teachable moment. It's not the time. When that activated trauma has activated the brain, it's not the time to say, what should you be doing right now? What did you just do wrong? You shouldn't have done that. Remember, that smart brain is gone. It's offline. It's not there. And yeah, we expect a lot of staff and we don't train them in the skills that they really need. They're great with med administration, bloodborne pathogen, all this, but they need to know how to listen and need to convey safety and emotional safety and caring and those soft skills that calm a person down, that lets them know you're okay. I'm okay with you. because you're a good person and I care about you. You know, the staff need to convey that caring. And sometimes the behaviors we see are really symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Very much so. One of the symptom areas, if you've heard my other training, you know, I go through all the symptom areas and we go in depth about it. But we're looking at a lot of problem behaviors, a lot of them are a symptom of post-traumatic stress disorder in the arousal arena, where, remember we said that amygdala is flashing danger signals, and it's filling that brain up with adrenaline and cortisol, and that brain is saying, I'm in danger, and they're now in a high state of agitation because there's more chemicals in that brain and in the entire body, and they're hyper aroused, so they may become agitated, they may start becoming aggressive because you just triggered me, and the best defense is a good offense, and I have to protect myself. 99% of the aggression I've seen has been out of fear, not a desire to hurt someone, never. Except for this one guy, and that's another story. And he actually was faking having a disability because people were told by their lawyer, that's how you can get out of your charge. Bad story, you don't want to know it. But 99%, it's out of fear. Property destruction, right? I worked with somebody during COVID who broke 3 computers. He would see something on the computer and break it and get upset. I'm going to die. We're all going to die. In that hyper aroused state. Startle response. What are you doing to me? What's happening? And the need to protect themselves at all costs. Right. So I have, I think, you know, and Janelle says some companies don't provide adequate training in certain areas. And the reality is we don't as a field, and we can't even blame the companies, right? Because trauma-informed care isn't front and center in the disability world. It's only just come into the mental health world. And oftentimes we don't get, you know, we lag behind, right? And we don't get it. But trauma should be a required training. I believe trauma-informed support should be required training because we're working with a group of very traumatized people. And even those who were raised in a very protected environment in their families were bullied in school. And that is trauma. I bet many of you know people who are always talking about a bullying experience, right? And that's trauma. I have many stories of folks who continue to re-experience, who continue to have nightmares about being bullied. That's its own trauma. I was asked to consult at the Forensic Institution in Maryland because they have just folks with disabilities. And they had this one guy, and they said, he's so non-compliant, we need you to come. And I came, and the psychologist didn't want me to come. It was actually a coordinator. The psychologist wasn't happy to see me. But they told me the story about this guy, George. And they said, George is refusing to take a bath, take a shower, wear clean clothes, have his hair cut, have his nails cut, won't let anyone touch him. And he likes to play video games, and he's very manipulative because we told him we would get him a new game if he took a shower, and he turned the water on, turned it off, said he took a shower, got the game, and we found out he didn't take the shower. I mean, that's the kind of thing my kids would do, right? Like, oh, come on, that's not a big deal. And then there's this, you know, file. They had me read the file, and the file was this guy grew up homeless. And it looked like his mother had a disability, but never received services and just was constantly homeless. So they were in shelters all the time, and he was bounced around from different schools. And here's what happened to him. When he turned 18, his mother said, well, I'm done now. And he went to the men's shelter in Baltimore City, where if you're a person with a disability, you're going to get abused. And he refused to take showers. Well, my guess is he was abused in that shower. And they would kick people out at 6 in the morning, and they couldn't get back in until 8 o'clock at night. They could only get one meal. And that one meal would be at the food kitchen, you know, and it was a really, really, really hard life. And what happened, the way he ended up, and he went to jail first and then into this institution. What happened was somebody came up from behind him and startled him, and he grabbed a brick and threw it at them. And that guy pressed charges. And so he got put in jail. And that was the first time that he got assessed as having an intellectual disability, because he had been through so many schools, he just fell through the cracks in the Baltimore City school system. And then so they moved him to the place where they had folks with intellectual disabilities not competent to stand trial. And he was there. And the first thing they told him was, if you clean yourself up, if you do what you're supposed to do, then we'll get you a placement in the community. Now, this guy, George, was not dumb. He was like, hell no. And so they're telling me how then he just became so manipulative, and he wouldn't take a shower, and he wouldn't, but he would act like he was. And then he doesn't talk, they said. I'm like, okay. So what I always do when I'm consulting, I always ask, is there a staff person that this person trusts? Because that person is always key, right? That's the person who gets them. That's that magic staff who has those skills of caring and connecting. So there was a wonderful instructor that he really trusted. And I said, can I meet with just the two of them? And they sat down, and she's telling me the story about how hard it was for him, you know, being at that men's shelter, and he had told her about it. I'm like, really? And she's like, yeah, he talks. He just didn't feel safe with those other people and didn't want to talk. And Rose, thank you. The trauma does bring out the behavior. Thank you, Janelle. It is actually true. Yeah, we don't equip the staff enough, and we have to teach them this piece, and we need to include it in our behavior plans. So he was just, that aggression, he was labeled as someone very aggressive, was just his startled response because someone came up from behind him and he freaked out and he threw the brick because he thought he was being attacked. He's been attacked many times, I'm sure, growing up in shelters. And he said, she said, it's okay. He talks, and she said, it's okay. We'll talk to her. So he started talking, and he said, I like it here. I don't want to leave. I have my own room. He'd never had his own room. And he said something no one ever told me at that facility. He said, the food is really good here. I'm like, really? It's like, yeah, because he got 3 meals a day. And he'd never had eaten, I think, as well. And when they said you clean yourself up, he made sure he stayed dirty because he wanted to stay there. So I said to them, can he just stay for a while? Can you let him know he can stay? So they did. He did really well. And then the brilliant staff, we did trauma-informed care training for all the staff there. And the brilliant staff came up with the best plan where they would stand in front of the bathroom with the door closed when he took a shower, and they would talk repeatedly so that he knew no one would come in. So it turned out he had been abused in the showers, and he needed to just know no one was coming in and that someone was standing guard, right? And I'm happy to tell you that the year after that, there was an agency interested in him, and he made a very gradual transition. They took months. He met all the staff. He kept visiting, and he successfully transitioned into a provider agency in the community. And he's doing really well. And, you know, that was the most brilliant plan I ever heard. And that's what needed to be in the behavior plan. Stand there and say, you're okay, you're okay, you're okay, right? That's a trauma-informed plan. How can we help someone with their trauma? And how can we recognize these symptoms, right? Night terrors, you know, waking up, falling, thrashing. Often people are screaming in the middle of the night because they're having nightmares because of their trauma. Sometimes people are misdiagnosed with bipolar disorder because they don't want to sleep because they have bad dreams. Poor attention, anxiety, of course, we see people, and then often all kinds of somatic symptoms where we can't find anything wrong with them. But Bessel van der Kolk wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score, because people will have all kinds of physical problems because of their emotional pain and be talking about their pain. Sometimes people are obsessed with their safety or have rituals, again, trying to stay safe. These are all symptoms of trauma, or big phobias or refusal or avoidance. All this is trauma. So let's look at what we should include in the plan. Okay? Document that trauma history. Know what we know. We don't always know everything, but we should explain if there were repeated foster care placements. We should explain if there were some family difficulties. And if there's abuse and it hasn't been proven, we say alleged abuse. But it's important to have that in there, because that oftentimes we lose the histories and then we lose the context of what that person has been through. And we're just looking at that behavior in a void, and we can't do that, right? We have to explain whatever happened to this person to the best of our ability. But I think it's very important to have a trauma history in the behavior plan, so we can have that context of what has this person been through. Even if they just say they were horribly bullied in school, bullying causes trauma. I've worked with so many folks with autism where it's just, I'm saying say alleged for legal reasons, but when we know, but it hasn't been proven, but it should be in there, because sometimes people say, well, if nothing was ever found, then we can't say it. No, say that it was alleged. But thank you for that clarification. Identify the triggers, as we've said, whatever they are. I mean, you know better than me, and everybody's different. And that's where we have to do our CSI, right? Our homework of trying to figure out and talk to staff and figure it out. I think we should have these ingredients necessary for recovery in the plan. What helps that person feel safe? What are the important connections? And how are they empowered so they don't have to use their behavior to be powered and they don't feel powerless, right? How can we give them their power rather than set up power struggles? So identify the keys to safety. Some people need those headphones and to have their music, right? Some people like certain types of music. Some people need to have a walk every day. Some people, the list goes on forever. And sometimes it's a safe person too. And sadly, sometimes safe people quit. But who is safe for that person? What is safe for that person? These things are so important to have in the plan, so we can go right to helping that person to feel safe when they're triggered. No, let's take a walk, or let's go talk to Joe, or, let's go pet the cat, whatever. What makes that person feel safe? Really critical. What are important connections? In every behavior plan that I supervise a number of people writing plans, we have the trauma history, then we have the safety, connections. What are the important connections? What makes that person feel safe? What are their connections? And what empowers them? We'll go over that. We have what the triggers are. We have all these things included. Identify where choice and agency and control are needed, right? Where does that person need? This person needs to choose what they wear every day. This person needs to go to the grocery store and pick their food. So what name is used to describe this type of trauma? I'm not quite sure. There's so much, right? There's so much, and people have such complex trauma. So I always go back to complex trauma, because people with disabilities don't have just one trauma. They have layer after layer after layer. And needing to be have control is important, to know that you're going to be okay, that I have some control over my life, right? So critical. And let's delineate strategies that decrease the power struggle. Oftentimes, a restraint will come out of a power struggle, and even when an agency is not using restraints or whatever, or that's when the restraints increase because the staff feels like they have to be in control, when we haven't said it's okay for them to have a bad day and it's not your fault. So decreasing that power struggle in any way that we can. So Rebecca asks, how do we deal with or cope with staff or administration trying to say that an incident or trauma occurred years ago and the individual needs to get over it? Refer them to me. So we need, thank you. I know, Rebecca, I know it's so frustrating. And when I've done this training, I've had people say to me, well, are you going to train my boss? Are you going to train the senior management? And, I don't mean to be obnoxious, but that's really critical. If we're going to really have a trauma-informed agency, I think we all have to get on board with it. And Jordan is raising your hand. So Jordan, would you like to say something? Or Jordan could, I don't know if Jordan's a girl or I don't know gender, but you're agreeing. Okay. But thank you. The reality is this should be a required training. Trauma-informed support should be a required training. This should be a point of view that's everywhere when you're working with people who have trauma, which we are, right? So thank you so much. And let me see. Yes, said Tanya. Yes, thank you for putting that in the chat. It has to go up and down the line. And not only do we need trauma-informed supports for people, trauma-informed behavior plans, we need trauma-informed leadership so that the staff can feel safe and that they can feel safe doing what the best thing is, right? We need it all. Thank you, Alexander. We need it all because this is what we're dealing with. So here we go. And positive, I believe in terms of positive procedures, we need to have a piece in the plan that talks about how that person communicates and what they need to communicate. Exercise, engagement, socializing, all these aspects are very important when we look at positive procedures. Communication, very important to identify modalities of communication. I have sadly been in situations where people were in high school and had devices and then transitioned into adult services, and that device went into a closet and they never were able to communicate. Sometimes there wasn't training for the staff, couldn't blame the staff in some situations, but people who have assistive technology have the right. Okay, someone wants me to go back to my previous slide, definitely. There we go. And I'm going to go through each one of these categories: communication, exercise, engagement, and socializing. And this PowerPoint will be made available. I think I'm right when I say that. Okay. Identify key phrases that make that person feel safe. There are people who need to hear certain words, right? Identify key phrases that are not safe, that this person, sometimes it's really a weird thing. I worked at an agency that used restraints, and then we were able to transition to stop using restraints. But the restraint word was strawberry. We would call strawberry, and then people would get, and so no one could ever hear that word strawberry because they all knew what it meant. Emphasizing listening techniques and outlining that structure, that daily listening, ideally morning and in the evening, and sometimes having a phone call to somebody in management on a weekly basis for someone that's always complaining or always feeling unheard can make a giant difference. Flood the person with attention, have socialization, have events, have fun. I'm working with a group on a dating app for people with intellectual disabilities called Hello, It's Me, right? Because we believe that we have to fight loneliness, that it's the biggest problem in the field, that isolation and loneliness. And that's when people re-experience their trauma. So events, I'm all for it. Yes, more fun, partying, good times, exercise, movement. Bessel van der Kolk says movement is so important for people that have had trauma. It's really important. Any way, shape, or form to get it out of that body. Play, engagement. Stuart Brown says the opposite of play is not work, it's depression. So more games, more play. And I have all those pieces, right, in the plan, right? We want a lot of positives. And a procedure for building a positive sense of self is so important. And we have that in our plans. Like, how can you help that person, talk to that person about who they are and what they feel good about and what's important to them, and talk to them about you're a good person. Praise character, not behavior, right? And Janelle says, I think people who say other people need to get over trauma have never experienced trauma themselves. And if they experience it, it was never coped in a positive way. Exactly, Janelle. Because I think we know life on planet Earth is hard. And that's why it's so important to me to have the trauma training, because the trauma builds that bridge. When you look at people, we want people to see the folks we support as human and understand these human beings have been through hell and back. And most of us know a little bit of hell, right? Because life on planet Earth is hard. So some people do tune it out. Thank you for that comment. Exactly. Because they haven't dealt with their own. But if we put this in the forefront and we have more trauma-informed cultures, people begin to see this as a reality. And finally, in my plan, I have the happiness assessment and a happiness procedure. So we have to do our functional assessment. That's a piece of what the state requires. And I believe strongly when we have the reinforcers, we should have things that people don't have to earn. And yeah, they don't get it. Yeah. People should have non-contingent, should have a lot in their plan that they can just look forward to that doesn't have to be earned. And then look at what makes them happy. And I have on my website, karynharvey.org, I have a happiness assessment that we fill out for every single person. What makes this person happy? You know, and you know, yeah, so tuned out is so true. Thank you so much. But so what makes this person happy? And we go through the 5 levels of happiness. What's their passive happiness, pleasure? What helps, what do they enjoy for play and engagement? Engaging and playing is very important in healing. What are the relationships that are important to them? I've worked with so many people that had boyfriends and girlfriends, and yet they never had a date with them. They sat next to each other in a day program for 30 years and never had a date. We fixed that. I have a singles group. I don't run it anymore, but now I'm working on the dating app. But because relationships are so critical and they're a big piece of healing, you know, it's so important. You can do the assessment without being a professional. You can do anything on my website without being a clinician. And my latest book, Trauma and Healing, not to promote it, but it has a lot of materials and it has lots of stories for people with disabilities about other people with disabilities who have been through stuff, and it has discussion questions. And they are all set up for not being, for being able to be used either way. So a clinician can use them and then go deep into it. And a DSP can use it and have a fun activity. That's how everything I design is. So because I want it to be widespread and I want people to have more resources, you know, which is so important to me. Oh, thank you. So that happiness assessment is on my website. I also have the happiness assessment for staff. And I want to encourage you to fill one out for yourself and take care of you and pursue your happiness. You deserve it. You're the best. So do one for the folks you're supporting, do one for you. And then achievement, we often don't celebrate people. We don't celebrate that oh, look, Joe didn't put a hole in the wall for 6 months. Let's have a party, right? Maybe we say, okay, you accomplished your goal. What's the next goal? But let's celebrate achievements and maybe like redefine, maybe take our standards down a little lower expectations, and just celebrate that somebody's doing okay and have a party and honor them. And then meaning and purpose, you know, helping folks to find meaning, find someone they can help, find a way they feel they make a difference. Even if they haven't gotten that job that pays, what else can they be doing that brings their life meaning? You know, what can be a rewarding activity for them where they feel they're making a difference, which is so important. I have a little workbook on my website called My Book About Making a Difference, where people can really celebrate how they make a difference. So, and here we go. Here's the website, karynharvey.org, where you can get all these materials for free. And facilitate growth and facilitate healing. And that's our goal. That's our goal. So we want to make the plan as simple as possible. We want to have that trauma history in it. We want to have what helps them feel safe, helps them feel connected, what choices are important to them, what power is important to them. Then all these aspects of their life that are positive, like how do we help them to communicate and support that? What do they enjoy doing? What exercise is important for them? You know, how can they really spread their wings and enjoy their life more? What's their happiness? And all these elements of positivity in the plan really support them in healing from their trauma, and having that joyful life and being in the present and stepping into the here and now. And that positive identity piece, really celebrating the good part of them, the abilities, right, that you were talking about. So at this point, we've been talking all along. I've really loved the chat. Some days I can go back and forth. Other days I don't do as good a job of that. But what I'm going to do is I'll read that last chat. Oh, thank you. Yeah, can you imagine? Thank you for saying that, Rebecca, because so often people are constantly being told what's wrong with them, and that becomes their identity. My identity is someone with a bad behavior. My identity is someone who can't get it right. My identity is someone who, every couple of months puts a hole in the wall. Imagine your worst day, and if that became who you were and how you were defined by. We all have bad days, I don't want to be Karen who nags her husband too much. On my worst day, I can be really annoying. I don't want to be defined by that, and I don't have to be, because I have that power over my life. But sometimes some of the plans I wrote actually facilitated people being defined by their behavior. And I realized that, and I had to regroup. I had to learn from the staff who were getting it right. So thank you. I'm going to stop sharing now and open it up for more questions. I just have loved all the chats. This has been really great. And thank you, Rose, for saying you enjoyed that. I really appreciate you guys. I appreciate all these wonderful comments. So anyone like to share? Maybe there's somebody who would like to unmute and say something. And Lori says she always tried to build up her staff. Thank you, Lori. That's the key. Because when the staff feel supported, it's natural for them to support the folks. Exactly. I mean, it's simple. Thank you. I'm so glad. Thank you for your kind comments. I really appreciate them. And I believe that you guys already get it, and so it kind of becomes our mission, right? It's not just me, but thank you, Jennifer. It's not just me. Like, you get it, and so we have this shared mission, to really get the word out and really help people to understand that folks have been through a lot and they need a lot of support, and the support is critical. The support needs to be about supporting healing, not fixing the person. ICPN is the best. Thank you guys so much. I agree. And Angela, oh, it's going too fast for me. Angela says, I make sure that when behaviors occur, after that individual's okay, staff are okay. Oh, Angela, thank you for saying that. That debriefing is so important, right? To go back and say, is everyone okay? Are you okay? And not have, that shaming. Sometimes after a behavioral issue, people get shamed. My new book, of course, I can share the title. Thank you so much, Deanne. Trauma and Healing just got published by AAIDD. And that's where I have a lot of materials. And it can be used by therapists or DSPs. So I just want, all of us to feel like we're in this together, because you guys really get it. And you're out there doing the work. And that's what's really important. So thank you. Thank you so much for all you do. Let me see, any questions in here? I don't know. I might have to ask Danielle because it's going so fast.
I have not seen any specific questions. The only question that I had seen was actually related to continuing education certificates, which again, just a reminder, they will be sent out to the email that you registered with. Give me about 14 days to get those out to everyone. If you don't receive it in that time period, you can send me an email, ddaily@hope.us, which I'll put in the chat box. Other than that, I'm not seeing any other specific questions. If anyone does have any questions, after this training, before the next training on June 16th, that you should all register for, you are more than welcome to email me. I can get those questions to Karyn. Be sure to visit her website. She has great information on the website as well.
Thank you for your nice comments too. This is so sweet. Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. Yeah, I don't see any more. I
love those hearts and the little Congrats.
Eddie asked how many trainings are planned. Karyn has one more training that's coming up on June 16th. It's Friday from 10 to 12. You can also view some past webinars that Karyn has done for us. You can access them via our website, icpn.org. If you click on the professional development tab, you can get to our past recordings, which links you to our YouTube channel.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yay. I can't wait to see some of you on the 16th.
All right. Thank you so much, Karyn. Again, we always love partnering with you. Fabulous job.
Thank you. You are fabulous people. You all. And you. Thank you, Danielle. Thanks so much. I really appreciate your time, your precious time.
Christina actually just came up with a question for you.
All right.
She said, what roles do you suggest for using and developing this training?
Okay. You know what? I would love to, and what is, it just went by so quickly. What is your background, Christina? Let's see.
It says she's a young professional. However, she does not have the desire to work in a clinical role.
I don't blame you. I've been doing it way too long. I believe that training is the most important thing we can do, and training the DSPs. And I do have a manual and slides, and I do a train the trainer, and we might do another. I don't know if we're going to do another round of that, but I believe the best thing we can do is train DSPs and do as much as we can to kind of get the word out. So one thing you can do is a training, and because you are a professional and you are in that world, it's very powerful. That's a very powerful thing you can do. You know, and I've been dedicating myself more and more to that, just realizing that that's what moves the needle forward, because then people get it and they see things differently. So thank you. And it's, you know, I think it's really important to train the people who aren't the clinicians, because that's who's making the big difference. If we train the supervisors, if we train the DSPs, if we, you know, get everybody on board, then that'll make the big difference. If it's just a clinician in the corner saying it's trauma, that doesn't help. It has to be a culture change. You know?
I really like that you focused on, you know, the behavior plans being unique, not the copy paste, right? Because each individual is unique, and we're trying to really truly support each individual. And that means, you know, finding out what works for them. Whether that's the communication aspect of it, or, you know, their preferences, the things that are going to make them successful. So thank you for touching on that.
Yeah. No more cookie cutter plans. They don't work.
Lily would like to know if you do podcasts.
I don't. I wouldn't know the first thing about it. But it would be fun. Yeah, so I think that every single person here can be making the difference by just, you know, of course, you're already doing it in your actions, but, you know, talking about it, we can facilitate trainings, we can do more to just kind of get that culture change out there, that everybody is different and everybody's been through so much in their own journey, you know, and everyone needs support. We need support. So we know.
Karyn, can you tell everyone what your webpage is?
Oh, yes, it's Karyn Harvey, HARVEY.org.
And yes, Mary, this will be archived for viewing later. All right, I am not seeing any other specific questions. As I said, if you have questions in the meantime, feel free to email me and I can get those to Karyn. But thank you again so much, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you again.
Everyone have a great day.
Thank you. Keep going, Becky. Keep going, everybody. Fight the good fight. Yes. Don't back down. Be an advocate.
Bye, everyone.
All right. Thank you.